Hi everyone, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to another video. Today I want to share with you how to make this row of hearts embroidery card front. Over on my blog today, you are going to find a number of freebies. The first one being this pattern. This is going to allow you to make the card front without a cutting machine. So what this is it's simply a printable pattern. You want to make sure that you print this off at 100% scale. You're also going to find a stitching guide. This is the same thing that is on the bottom of that printable pattern. It's just a little bit bigger if you need something a little bit bigger to look at, or if you're using the SVG, which you will also find over there. The SVG is the exact same as the printable pattern. It is just if you want to use electronic cutting machine to cut out this card front. Now the card front measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And using the printable pattern, that's what I'm going to be using today, I'm going to simply follow the directions that are on the bottom. So the first thing I want to do is cut out around those lines. And while I have out my paper trimmer, I'm also going to cut a piece of white cardstock to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. That's A2 in size. This is the same size as that printable pattern, so it's going to line up nicely. You can cut it a little bit bigger if you want, but just know that that pattern is to fit an A2 size card front. Now what I want to do next is tape on that pattern to the card front. I don't like to leave any wiggle room. I always move things, so I just like to tape it down. That way I can move around as I want to. But I'm just going to use micropore tape to tape this down. As you're taping it down, just be careful where you put it. Number one, it gets a little bit harder to go through more layers with your poking tool that I'm using here. And for poking tools, I have the Tim Holtz retractable craft pick that I will be using, but you can also just use the needle that you're going to sew this with. You simply poke the holes now. That's all there is to it. Now underneath this, I do have a couple pieces of craft foam to protect my work surface. If you don't have craft foam, use an old book, use an old telephone book. You can use a stack of paper that you're going to recycle. There are a number of different things you can put behind this, something to protect that work surface. And also something with a little give so you can completely poke those holes all the way through that cardstock. Now as you're poking these holes, you do want to make sure that whenever you put down that tape, it's not over any holes. I made that mistake here, and that kind of pushes the adhesive onto the cardstock, and then when you go to sew, it can cause not problems, but it can be bothersome. So just keep that tape away from where you poke the holes. Now to check to make sure that you have poked all of the holes on this card front, just give it a flip over in the back. Make sure that you've poked those through. If this is a brand new pattern, you can also hold it up to the light and make sure you can see through all those holes. You can reuse these though, so not every time is that going to work. Now here's a look. The one on the left is the one I hand punched. The one on the right is cut with my Cricut. Same exact thing. You can get the same look either way you do this. Now I'm going to get out my stitching guide, and I am going to pick out some colors to sew this with. Now the stitching guide is always colorful. That is simply to help you put down, pick out, I guess you could say, those stitches in that stitching guide. You don't have to follow those. Just pick out whatever colors you want to use. Now for the stitching itself, I will be using DMC embroidery floss. This is very cheap. You can buy it at most craft stores. It comes in a number of colors. I like to keep it in this container on bobbins, and I always write the number. Now for this card front, I will be doing kind of an ombre effect. So I am going from dark pink to light pink. Top will be darkest, bottom will be lightest. So I am just going to pick out several different pinks and kind of arrange them in the order I want. Now I will list the colors that I used right here if you want to follow along, but no, you can use any colors for this. Customize it to whoever you're making the card for. With my colors picked out, it's time to start stitching. I like to start off by taping down my ends onto the back of the cardstock. I again use that micropore tape. It's a nice thin tape, so it doesn't add a whole lot of bulk. You're already going to get some bulk from your thread, but this doesn't add much to it. So I like to tape it down with micropore tape closest to the hole where I am starting, making sure that none of that tape goes over any of those openings, because again, as you push your needle through, you will be grabbing some of that adhesive. It will transfer to the thread and your needle and make it just a little bit harder to sew. Now I'm simply going to start sewing following that stitching guide. Now, there are a number of different ways you can go about this to follow that stitching guide and make it look exactly like this, but also know you can have fun with it. If you look at this pattern and you see little X's in the hearts, or you just want to outline the hearts, by all means, don't poke the inside holes. There are a number of different ways you can go about this and make it your own card front, if you will, and have fun with it. So maybe you want to stitch this, but you don't want to stitch all those little lines in between. Leave out those inside holes when you go and you punch in your holes. That's not a big deal. Or you can go and you can make the lines down and you can make lines across. It's up to you when you stitch this. Now, always with stitching, you're going to get some tangling with your thread, or I always do anyway, because sometimes I overshoot it and I like to get more than I can handle sometimes, or I'll hit some of those adhesive spots and it will just tangle on me. So in order to get those tangles out, I like to use my needle. What I do is wherever that knot is, I'll stick the needle inside the knot as best I can and just kind of start wiggling it back and forth gently so you don't separate all those threads. But normally that will loosen it up enough to where the knot will just kind of pull right out. It's never really tied, it's always just bunched. So if you can get it loosened and then just pull two of the threads that are kind of at the ends of it, it normally will come apart for you. I'll continue to stitch this. I'm only going to show you one of these hearts, and each one is stitched exactly the same way. But again, have fun with it. You can make each one different. You can make each one the same. It's really up to you. One thing to take note of while you are stitching is your thread will not last the whole way through this card front. You probably won't even get enough to do one row of these hearts if you're stitching them the way I am. So what I like to do whenever I am switching out threads is, first of all, I will use up all the thread that I possibly can, and then I will simply snip off from the needle, and then I use again that micropore tape to hold down the end. Then I take a new piece, thread it through my needle. These DMC threads are a little bit harder to get through a needle. You do need an embroidery needle to do this, but I also like to use a needle threader. It's a cheap little tool that just helps me get these needles threaded without much of a headache. And I will leave those down in the description box below in the supply list as well. They're really a nice little handy tool and nice and cheap. But whenever you start a new thread, again, tape down those ends and start it as close to the hole that you will be going into. So it might not be where you left off the last time, but that just makes you waste less thread. So start that wherever you will be going into with the next hole. Now I finished this off camera. This takes quite a bit of time. So I went and sat down, watched a movie. Here you can see the back, all of those different threads taped down all over the place. The back is not as pretty as the front, but as long as you keep those threads and that mess on the back, the front always turns out gorgeous. Now I will be putting this onto an A2 card base. If you don't know how to make your own card bases, I will leave a link in the top right hand corner. This video shows you how. You will also find a free printable on my blog where you can print off the dimensions, and it also shares how to cut and fold the card bases, the different sizes. I'm doing A2, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. I went ahead and cut out my card base, gave it a score and folded it. And now I'm going to load up that card front onto the card base. Now with the thread, I do like to use a foam adhesive to attach this. You can use just a tape adhesive, but it's going to be bulky and it's going to feel bulky. So a little bit of foam gives some space between the thread and that paper. and it just allows it to lay a little bit flatter without that bulky look. So I like to use foam adhesive just wherever I have some openings. I don't like to put it over the thread, just straight to the paper, and then just place that down onto the card front, and there it looks nice and flat and clean. So with that done, it's time to finish this card off. I am using this Thinking of You stamp set from Avery Elle. I cut out a few banners, one from white cardstock and one from vellum. I'm going to stamp down my sentiment on the white cardstock banner. I'm using my Mini Misty. I'm a little bit out of practice with stamping. This just helps me get it centered and right, where I'm not going to have to cut another one of these. I'm using my VersaFine Claire and Nocturne. Again, this is very black. It's a very black ink pad, and it just works really well for stamping sentiments, nice and crisp, and nothing bleeds into the cardstock, which is nice. So I went ahead and stamped down that sentiment, and now it's time to put that onto the card base. I layered up that vellum banner underneath. I put some foam tape on the back. Again, this just helps with that bulk of the thread on the front. It keeps that sentiment away from it and just makes it lay nice and flat. I stuck that right in the center, and then to finish this card off, I am adding some clear jewels. Now, in order to put these down, these are a little fussy to work with. I like to use my Quick Sticks tool, and then I also have a needle point glue bottle, and for this, I am using Glossy Accents. That just is a glossy finish glue. You can also put it over things to make them glossy as well, but that's another topic. But this is a glossy finish glue, so if I do get any on those gemstones, it's not going to dry matte and take down the shine at all. It will just add to the shine, if anything. And I like to use different types of glue whenever I'm putting down different types of accents, and Glossy Accents is the one I chose for this. So there's a finished look at that card. I know hearts are very Valentine-esque, however, I feel like you can use them year-round. And don't forget to head over to my blog today, because all of those freebies, the printable pattern, the stitching guide, and that SVG cut file are all over there today for free for you to download. That is going to do it for me today. Thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed, you can do that now. Happy crafting!